What's up, Todd? How's it going this morning?
It's going great. How are you doing, Joe?
Good, man. Good. Thanks for coming on the Joe and Friends show today. Looking forward to this conversation. I think a lot of people have been asking about Firebolt, and there's a lot of interest. So
That's great to hear. Yeah, it's an exciting company. That's why I joined. So happy to be here today, though, to talk about kind of my experience that led me here.
awesome. Let's get into that. I mean, first to start off for people who don't know who you are, do you want to go with a quick intro?
Yeah. So I've been in BI for about 20 years. I was a CS grad who was a Java programmer and was at a company actually here in Utah called Corda. I joined them in '96. Or sorry, '06. I'm getting my ears crossed off, but here, '06. And so feels like it was a lot longer than that ago. But I was a Java developer, and I was building like charts and graphs in Java code and UI elements and things like that for a dashboard product. And I'd always kind of been interested, even in school, in SQL. Took a database course that I thought was really interesting, and had a professor who really challenged us to learn SQL really well, which ended up being a great thing for me. And so, you know, as time went on, it became apparent at Corda that they needed some people who could go into customers like Prudential and Apple and other customers that were trying to get started on Corda but needed help. And so I became kind of a professional services / sales engineer role where I was helping customers get on the platform. And that really kind of introduced me to, the whole business intelligence and data warehousing movement. And then, I got an opportunity to work for the LDS Church. Now, it's a very interesting tech shop. A lot of former Microsoft employees work there.
Oh,
And they were a very strict Kimball shop. For those who do a lot of data warehousing, they actually had a very mature data warehouse practice, and they were running an Oracle data warehouse, and they had business objects on the front end. And I learned all about what a data warehouse was, really what a star schema really meant, instead of just a set of tables, and kind of why, and studied Kimball methodology, and kind of got into data warehousing, which was really exciting for me. And then actually got the chance to go back to what became Domo. So Corda was acquired by another company and became Domo. And that really introduced me to cloud. So I'd learned all these BI principles, data warehousing, and suddenly we were trying to take it to cloud. Now, the problem was there really wasn't a data platform on the cloud. So, we looked at Redshift, just came out in about 2012. That's when we were kind of getting going there at Domo. And it was exciting times for cloud, trying to do cloud-based data analysis, all those things. And that's kind of where I came to really believe. I saw it a little bit at Corda, but I came to believe that the data platform ultimately would drive the user experience with any kind of chart or dashboard or anything like that. Because at the end of the day, users want fast data. So I went from there to Amazon, had an opportunity to be a BI engineer at Amazon, which was really exciting.
nice.
I worked in the mobile shopping group. So I wasn't in the AWS. Everybody thinks about AWS, but I was actually on the website working in retail data. But it's one of the most interesting data sets in the world. You're getting the clickstream data. I worked closely with the device identification team that was using Hadoop heavily to identify different devices that were accessing the website, and obviously one of the most trafficked websites in the world. So trying to compare behavioral data between shoppers who shopped on the website on a computer versus tablets and phones and different things, that was really exploding. And worked there for a year and a half and was really enjoying it when I heard about a company called Snowflake. And I kind of took an interview because I thought it might be interesting. And I met the founders of Snowflake, and I met the CEO, Bob Muglia, and I fell in love with the company. And they actually made me an offer that night at the end of my round of interviews done in San Mateo, and I was sold. And so I left most of my stock on the table at Amazon to join this little startup called Snowflake, and that ended up being a really, really good decision. And what I did for most of the time at Snowflake was I built the ecosystem. So when I started, I was a sales engineer, just kind of onboarding the first few customers, and then we got into building an ecosystem, because we figured out that an ecosystem is really important, getting data in, managing that data, and then obviously visualizing that data. So built out that ecosystem, had that opportunity. And then it's funny that we talk about performance today, because I kind of went chasing the rabbit of performance. So I joined a company called Kylogens that is doing OLAP for big data, the Apache Kylan project, which is an interesting project that's been pivoted from being based on Hadoop to now trying to work with Spark and other Snowflake and other cloud technologies. And then a year and a half stint at ThoughtSpot, where we really relied on performant databases as our thing, because again, you're trying to create an interactive experience for users, and users don't want to wait a ton of time. And now I'm here at Firebolt to be back on the back end, because I love it so much.
That's awesome. I mean, what makes Firebolt different from a lot of these technologies that you just mentioned?
Well, it was architected for the cloud, and I said that for a long time at Snowflake. But in this case, the architects came in with the core tenet of speed, and really how they do that is how they store the data. At the end of the day, it's a physics problem. How quickly can I bring data together depends on how quickly I can search through data and how quickly I can aggregate data and different things. So a lot of it comes down to the way that we store the data, the way that we allow you to select an optimal compute profile. But really, it was just from the beginning architected for extreme performance.
Interesting. What is extreme performance? I hear a lot of vendors talk about their fast query engines these days. I'm always curious, what does extreme performance mean to the people saying this? What does it mean to you?
Well, to me, what it really means, and this goes back to my Corda days, my first dashboarding days, is that to get what I call an interactive user experience, means that I have to be able to ask any business question, within reason. Obviously, there's limits on that, but I need to be able to ask any business question, get an answer within 3 seconds. We come up in this internet age now where we get an answer to everything. I still remember I worked at Amazon, and we were discussing during the holidays, we'd had some latency, and they were complaining that 5 seconds for a page to load was incredibly slow for the site. And an SVP at Amazon actually made everybody in the meeting count to 5, because that was such a terrible user experience. And yet in the data space, we've been expecting users to wait for spinning wheels for years.
Mm-hmm.
And really, as valuable as an initial dashboard is, the value in any kind of data analysis tool is the ability to ask different questions and get answers. I think so. So really, to me, what extreme performance is enabling that, time of thought from the end user. And obviously that means you may have to prepare the data in a special way to get there. But that's really the experience we're trying to create.
What do you think's been driving this move towards faster response times, faster time to value? I think to your point, it's been sort of this almost a complacency with the time that it takes to get basically anything in data, frankly. And so, whether that means you're waiting a couple hours to get a report, or whether that's like waiting for a day for your pipeline to finish. I mean, it seems like some people just think that this is okay. But recently, I'm sure you've noticed the same thing, obviously, but it seems like the tone is shifting a lot.
Well, I think companies like ThoughtSpot are really driving to get the technology, business, whatever you want to call it, business intelligence, dashboarding, to get it into the hands of business users. Tableau's been there for a long time, but Tableau kind of focused on the analyst role and really making it simple for an analyst to get answers to their questions. But more and more business leaders, I think, have come to appreciate data, and they're just not willing at this point to have their data person be the long pole in the tent. At Amazon, I serviced 2 VPs directly, and they were completely reliant on me for data. In fact, everything that I delivered to them was in a Word document, because not only did they want the chart, so we'd extract the data into Excel, we'd build a very customized chart, and then we would put it into words so that we could write, 1 or 2 pages about why the numbers in the chart matter, from a business perspective. And it really was an eye-opening to me to be sitting with those 2 VPs in a key meeting and have them turn to me after I'd presented the data and ask, well, what should we do? And I'm like, well, I'm always the data guy. Like, why are you asking me? And so, it really kind of was a light bulb moment for me that the people who understand the data best should be the ones making the decisions. And smart managers have figured that out, that hey, if I want to be a good manager, I need to understand not only how to get data from my analyst who's, an expert, but how do I self-serve? And self-service BI has been, a dream for a long time, but I think the technology is finally getting there where we can start talking about it realistically.
Yeah, the technology's here now. Now the hard part of adoption starts. So that's a different story. I actually got a question here from Brian Olson. What's up, Brian? He asked, does Firebolt also take a single source of truth philosophy like Snowflake, or is Firebolt fine being part of a larger distributed architecture?
So that's a great question. And what I would say is that the cloud has really democratized data warehousing. And so what we're finding is these on-demand solutions give us the opportunity to, for users, not for me as a seller, but for users and practitioners and data warehouse engineers. Data engineers is kind of the new hot job now, and they pick the best job for the best technology for each workload, and we really feel like that's the way that works most effectively for all companies. Is you should examine each workload. And it was really interesting to kind of watch the evolution of the relationship between Snowflake and Databricks at the time, because Databricks did certain things that Snowflake couldn't do, and you see Snowflake starting to add Snowpark to kind of bridge that gap a little bit. But before we knew it, we had 150 joint customers. And both sides, the salespeople were kind of like, hey, you need one source of the truth, and that, should be us. And so there was kind of a tug of war. But for those of us who really understood what was happening, we were excited just to, it's like each workload can go where it needs to go, and you get the best of all worlds. And so, you may have a data warehouse in Snowflake, you may have a data lake, a Delta Lake, but you have 1 or 2 jobs that just need that sub-second performance, and Firebolt's happy to sit alongside those other technologies where appropriate.
Interesting. Hopefully that answers your question, Brian. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, it definitely seems like there's one school of thought where there is a single source of truth, and everything should just reside in that, that infrastructure or that system. And then, but what you're also seeing is sort of this explosion of best of breed. We'll focus on databases for now, but best of breed database is very use case specific. Do you have any opinions about how people should approach that?
I think data silos are bad. So like, I'm not advocating that everybody go create a bunch of data silos. So I've heard stories about companies where you come to the board meeting and 2 different business units have different numbers from this supposedly the same data because it comes from different silos. Like that is why companies are advocating the single source of truth. On the other hand, today's technologies interact in a much better way. Before, you had your Oracle and it was like a full Oracle stack, or my Microsoft stack. And, it's funny, at the LDS Church, of all places, we had a full Oracle stack, and then we had several units that had Microsoft stacks because they had specific needs, the supply chain or whatever. Dynamics AX is a great supply chain tool, and Microsoft has a great stack around Dynamics AX. And so like you ended up with these silos. And what's changed since then is that Snowflake, lives in the cloud. AWS, the S3 data lake, whether it's being managed by, Databricks or, there's now a myriad of technologies for managing those data lakes, can kind of act as that single source of truth. But the compute that you're using on that data can come from a variety of places that are all built around the same concept. So you're breaking down silos, but using technology to effectively, leverage that data in different ways. So all the data kind of reports back to the same, so you avoid the silos, but you get to leverage the performance of the different attributes of the different platforms.
Interesting. Yeah, I was talking to was it Ori from Upsolver gave a talk last week at my meetup, and he was talking about something similar. I think his prediction was that object store would basically be the kind of the center of where you put all your data, and then basically just databases would just be APIs into that data. Um, you know, different databases do different things, so that's interesting. I mean,
yeah, in fact, Upsolver was one of the names that I almost dropped that name while I was discussing, the data lake. Yeah, they're a great solution for managing your data lake.
yeah, for sure.
But yeah, there's lots of them out there, and some of it's open source, some of it's Snowflake took a lot of grief for being not open source, and they've done a lot of open source work, but obviously the engine is what it is. But I think you've seen us at Firebolt. Obviously, we want to be the data layer for what we can, but we've really embraced open source. I think DBT is kind of driven a lot of people, and obviously they're a piece of the data stack, but it's really shown the power of what open source can do.
Yeah, I mean, walk me through that. I mean, you've been in the data space for a really long time. You've seen, I would say, several epochs, so to speak, or generations of tooling. I mean, what's been your impression of sort of the progression of open source over the years?
Well, I think you look at each of the layers of the stack, right? You have data acquisition, which tends to be pretty proprietary, right? And people try to go with SOAP and REST, and there are some value there, but at the end of the day, if I want to get data out of Salesforce, like a connector like a Fivetran, or even some newcomers there, like that's an easy way to get that data and manage that data, right? Because everybody kind of knows what the type of questions you're trying to ask of that data. And then then you want to manipulate the data because you got to bring it all together, right? And so there is really, I was pushing from the early days at Snowflake, not just me, the whole company was pushing ELT over ETL. I can even say when we were at the LDS Church, we were running data services from business objects, and like our biggest kind of blocker was the ETL server. Like the transform server was the hardest part of all of that.
Hmm.
Right. And so now you're pushing that workload down into the scalable layer of the data warehouse or the data lake, and it's super valuable. And now you've created, what the DBT Labs team has managed to do is create a language for defining those transforms that goes just beyond just SQL, right? And it's a common language that you've seen a couple of other companies take a shot at kind of doing that. And so that really allowed people to standardize. And I think that's where open source comes into play. Now, when you get into compute, you have Spark. You started with MapReduce, and Google open sourced that, and Spark. At the end of the day, a lot of these open source projects are coming from really smart people at really smart companies who were solving a very specific problem. Presto came from from Facebook, right? And they had a very specific problem, and Presto solves that problem very, very well. I do think that the one mistake people make with open source is maybe the misapplication. They get a name in an open source project that they think, well, I need to do DBT, or I need to do Presto, or I need to do Spark. And it's like, you really need to understand what those technologies do well. So I think that's the one challenge that comes with open source is you don't necessarily have a vendor pushing them and kind of driving the use cases that are optimal. But, I think it really gives everybody an opportunity to get involved and create some standards that, move us all forward. And really, I mentioned earlier that how data engineering has really become kind of a hot technology. I think a lot of these projects have contributed to that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's remains to be seen too where data engineering goes. I have no clue, even though I call myself one. So, kind of back to Firebolt. I mean, walk me through the kind of the genesis of it. Like why? I mean, there's a probably a billion databases out there right now. A lot of great ones. Why did Firebolt need to come onto the scene?
Yeah, great question. So, it's interesting having been at Corda. and seen kind of the impact of what a data warehouse would do. And this was on premise. We had customers that were using Teradata, others that were using Oracle. You see kind of that impact on the business layer, on the front end. And Domo, the same story, especially being in the cloud, trying to kind of drive where, Redshift had just come out, BigQuery, Snowflake eventually came out, in that space. And, our founders came from, a number of them came from Sisense. And you think about what different BI tools had done. So at Sisense, they created the Elastic Cube as a technology, because at the end of the day, the users are going to blame the front end if you don't have fast queries. So you think about, the only BI vendor that really didn't get into the caching world was Looker, and even then they had PDTs, which were kind of a caching layer built into the database. But you look, Tableau acquired a company to try to improve their extracts. Really great technology, by the way. That I don't know that they've made the best use of that technology, but and what I really saw at Snowflake is that like Snowflake's a great all-purpose database, general-purpose analytics, but not really designed for super speed, right? Like every query takes a certain amount of time because of the way that their optimizer runs, the way that they do certain things, and so I think that the founders saw a gap in the cloud for a hyper performant database where you can go to Tableau users and say you don't need extracts, or to any BI tool and say, hey, just hit the database directly and you're going to get your sub-second query times. And where you don't get it out of the box, you can tune the database to get the performance that you need. And so I think it really came from the fact that they had been built a BI tool, work with that BI tool, and knew what was required to drive BI.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Like, where does Firebolt work? Is it working in any particular clouds or?
Today we're only AWS. So the real idea, and I mean, we did the same thing at Snowflake, right? It's like get it right on the first cloud. And AWS is the most popular. It's got great interfaces. They're a fantastic partner organization to work with. They've been great to work with. And AWS was just kind of where we felt like we needed to start. We will definitely support other clouds down the road, but today it's AWS.
Interesting. Walk me through that too. Like, what are there any limitations with Firebolt right now in terms of? I mean, can I do like my Kimball star schema in it, or if I can, like,
it's what I'd say is data modeling is really important in Snowflake, and like a Kimball model fits great. Or sorry, in Firebolt. Sorry. Because it's the opposite, right? In Snowflake, we would claim data modeling didn't matter. And in Firebolt, we're like, hey, data modeling does matter because you want to get performance. And so data modeling does matter. Kimball star schemas are great. We have two types of tables. We have facts and dimensions. And so it fits really naturally into that. But, one of the things that I'm kind of excited to do at some point is to get Data Vault in there and try out Data Vault. Because I know, I feel like it's kind of got very specific use cases and doesn't necessarily fit everywhere, but can be great when it's needed. So, I think, the schema does matter. The indexes that you define will make a big difference in your performance. But, and I'd say right now we're missing some of the basic functionality that we will add over time. And so, we'll even tell somebody, if you're just getting started with the data warehouse, come talk to us in 6 months for that. Then right now, if you've got a workload that hurts in terms of performance, and, working with BI customers over a number of my last few jobs, like there are just those certain workloads that show up as performance pains. And if you've got one of those, come talk to us.
What are those kind of workloads?
So a lot of times it's embedded BI, because you want your embedded BI to operate kind of seamlessly, right? Your app is fast. You've designed your app to be fast. And now you've got a page where you've got some kind of metrics that you want to display, whether it's D3 or you've embedded Looker or Sisense or something else. And you just want it to be super fast. That's very much a use case that we have. And then, the other one is, you've got petabyte speeds for business users, right? So you've got our petabyte scale data that you need at the speed of, a couple seconds, and you know what the optimizations are, you know what type of business questions they're going to be asking. Those are typically what we see in our first kind of round of customers.
That's really cool. I mean, walk me through the embedded BI case too. I see that popping up more and more with clients. I mean, first, what is it for people who don't know? I think this is maybe
yeah. So when I'm building an app, a lot of times that app's going to generate data, right? And the users of that app are going to want to be able to access the data to understand what's happening. Whether it could be a financial services app, banking app, where I want to go see my performance over time, or how's my portfolio performing versus someone else's. That's a very common one. Or one big one is in advertising, right? So I'm buying advertising from an ad tech company. I want to see how my advertising is performing. And so, they're going to bring that data into that platform, and they want it to feel like a native part of the platform.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Why wouldn't, if you're an app developer, why wouldn't you just put all that data into like your relational database? And
well, I mean, obviously, I talk a lot. In fact, I've taught a lot of people over the years about the difference between OLTP and OLAP.
Yeah.
Right. And while OLAP may have kind of fallen out of use, it's basically the idea of saying, are you storing the data to handle massive amounts of transactions, like a website where people are going in and setting values or taking actions, and we're tracking those actions? Or am I trying to report on something? Am I trying to kind of view the data? And obviously, OLAP's kind of shifting into this like almost real-time OLAP, but really the question is, am I using the database for storing transactional data, or for running aggregates and other things like that? And so the two systems, really, nobody's yet come up with a database that does both really effective. Vendors like Oracle that have both options, you kind of have to tune the database based on which use case you want to run.
Makes sense. With Firebolt too, I guess, like, how do people sign up for it if they want to try it out, and what's the cost model?
So the cost model, I'll start there, is pay as you go, right? And based on the compute profiles that you choose, you pay as little as 30 cents an hour. And again, we're charging by the second, so you don't automatically get billed for an hour when you spin it up. But to get access, come to our website, work with our team. We're still in kind of a beta phase, in that we do have production customers. So I'm not saying that we don't have production customers, but to get access to Firebolt, you've got to talk to our sales team. So, if you go to our website, you can get in touch with our sales team, but you kind of have to talk to us to get going. I would guess probably 6 months from now, we'll have self-service from the website with a free trial. We'll definitely, our sales team will definitely work with you in terms of, getting you access, in a trial environment, so that you can try it out without, any financial. But we are on the AWS marketplace is kind of how we operate. But again, you have to work with our team to get access today.
The consumption model is interesting, or you just pay by the second. But kind of bring it back to embedded analytics is something I've been wondering about too. When you have a consumption model where you're paying, by the amount they consume, how do you manage costs from spiraling out of control when you're providing a backend for embedded analytics?
That's a great question, and I think we're hard at work on that. At the end of the day, I believe to really drive a consumption-based model, whether this is whether you're talking about BigQuery or Snowflake or Firebolt, you've got to figure out kind of a way to monetize that data, because at the end of the day, your users who use the product are costing you money. Now, you want them to use your product. You want them to, to interact with their data, but every time they do, it's costing you as a customer of one of these data platforms money. And so it becomes very important to kind of identify the value of the data and figure out the monetization scheme. Now, with some apps, it's not about a separate cost. Maybe it's like, hey, the value of our advertising platform is that we give you all this data. But I think you've got to start a project like this kind of understanding what the budget constraints are, and kind of the best and worst case. And like I said, sometimes the best case is the worst case, is you get a ton of users and they drive your consumption through the roof. And you just got to plan for that and understand the value of your data. And are you increasing the subscription price? Are you creating a tier that includes of your product that includes the analytics? Are you charging them on a per use basis to run queries? Like there's a lot of different models, and each business will have to find a different one. But I think, that's one of the things that I realized even well before I joined Firebolt, is like, as customers are deploying these very, very powerful embedded analytics platforms, they've got to kind of come up with the model. And like I said, they got to kind of verify that at scale it actually works. Now, hopefully what happens is at scale, your cost goes down because you're able to achieve some of those economies of scale, and your users you're still collecting the same amount from the different users. So you actually make more money. But it really, like, that's become a key element of data platform, is like, how can I monetize this data?
Mm-hmm. Big time. What do you think's been driving that? Because that wasn't always the case. I think data was treated more as an internally facing asset. But what did you see that caused the shift towards seeing data as a monetizable asset that you could?
Well, I think there's so many people now make decisions based on data. Advertising. Go watch Mad Men, and it's like they're making all these decisions based on gut feel, and the advertisers of the past. And now it's all based on numbers. It's all based on data, and the data that we're collecting is so much greater than we've ever collected. And whether that's understanding your supply chain, think about the world today. COVID suddenly made it super important to understand what's going on with your supply chain, what's going on with your usage patterns. Are you seeing more people in your stores? If you've got a retail, are you seeing more people online? What are the patterns? And you've got to be able to react to data quickly. And I think the other thing that's happened is that people are just used to having data in their daily lives. Mm-hmm. I can go see data, from my face. Like, it's as simple as looking and seeing how many new emails I have in my message box, right? Like, people are just used to using data to drive their daily life. And so in business, it just makes sense. And so they want access to that data and to deliver it. And I think the other element, again, is these on-demand platforms that before it's like, hey, I'm going to go make a sunk cost. I'm going to go buy Teradata so that I can support, all of this data needs. And now it's like, hey, the more users that I have, the more this thing costs. So, it's great in that you can break out who's using where, and you can charge back. So you don't have one department that's the least valuable department in your company using your entire data warehouse and not having a way to know who it is that's using it. You can break it down by use, and you can see, how much is internal versus external versus, and even break it down beyond that. And I think that is what gives you the ability to then, really identify data as not just a cost center, but eventually turn it into a profit center.
Mm-hmm. What are some examples of ways that you've seen companies successfully turn their data into profit centers?
Well, I think, there's the one that's kind of scary to all of us, which is, and it's funny because when I was at Amazon, we swore up and down that we would never sell data about our customers to any external advertisers. But obviously there's, we always say, if you're not paying for a service, you are the product. Mm-hmm. And they've definitely monetized data in that way, which it's good and bad. Like I said, you should know, as long as you go into it with eyes wide open, that you are the product. I think, mm-hmm. It's a deal we all are willing to make. But, I see companies like Capital One really doing amazing things with their data and finding out ways to really kind of take the value beyond. And again, they're not selling like individual, being people's data, but, market trends, analysis, how people are using their credit cards in an anonymized way to just understand patterns. And then that data can then be shared with, partners and other things. And so when you can really achieve kind of a business that's founded on data, you'll find lots of different ways to kind of monetize that data over time.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. What are your thoughts on data sharing?
It's a fantastic technology, and to be honest, that's something we're definitely, it's on the roadmap at Firebolt, and obviously I was a big part of it. Now I do think there's some natural like speed bumps along the way, and Snowflake's definitely hit a lot of them. I was involved in some of the early discussions of data sharing, and it's such an exciting technology. Everybody puts their data in the cloud, and you think about like one use case was for police departments across boundaries to be able to share data about criminals, because they'd have a criminal go on a multi-state spree and they could track it, or even maybe in a, that may sound big brotherish, but in a different way, like hospitals tracking outbreaks of different diseases and different things, where that data, again, anonymized to avoid too much abuse of that data. But there's just some exciting things where companies can bring their data together, and as long as you have a secure way, and you see these marketplaces kind of sprouting up. AWS has one, Google has one. Obviously, Snowflake was kind of first mover there, but definitely Firebolt sees the value in it. And really, it's kind of a network effect, right? You got to get people into the same platform in order to really leverage it. But I think over time, it will become something that really makes a difference.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's one of the macro trends that you'll probably see over the next decade, is just kind of a widespread data sharing, which I think poses some really interesting thought experiments in terms of kind of an architecture that supports, like you say, an ecosystem of data. It's something that I don't think has really existed yet. And it's
it's exciting to see, because you think about it and it's like suddenly I can have all of this data that is relevant to my decision making in my business, that's coming, that I don't have to ETL, that I don't have to go buy a service that sends me a hard drive, thumb encrypted hard drive every month with new data. And I've dealt with those. I've downloaded those at certain companies, right? And suddenly you're saying, hey, I can have interesting data, and it's open to everyone, right? And if you can get that really to a pay-as-you-go model, suddenly it's not just it doesn't require a giant ad agency to be able to pay the fees of an Experian or, others in that space, Equifax, the others. Suddenly I can buy a little bit of information to answer a question that I have that impacts my business. And it's super exciting that, and I don't have to have a big data team. Suddenly I can have a smaller data team and get a ton of work done, where the data team's just focusing on my internal data feeds, and I'm using data sharing to get the rest of my data. And it really opens up a lot of exciting possibilities.
It really does. I think it opens up a big opportunity for a lot of these platform providers too, to basically be kind of the toll gates.
Yeah, I mean, there's some challenges there around liability. I think that's one of the things that's holding it back.
Yeah.
Is, what happens if this data gets out? And they've done, the vendors have made the right decisions in terms of, making sure that the data is secure first and foremost.
Right.
And here at Firebolt, we'll do the same. Like when we get to the point where we're ready to do data sharing, it'll be, incredibly safe and secure. But yeah, I do think, it's a great opportunity. It's not necessarily vendor lock-in in the traditional sense, but obviously there's gravity to that data, and it's going to pull people into orbit around big, important data sets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, kind of switching gears a bit. I mean, you've got a lot of context in the data space. I would say more than a lot of people I know. Where do you think everything's going over the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I think what we're really starting to see is the laggards coming to cloud. It's funny because I watch TV and I see all these hybrid cloud solutions being pitched. I guess they're trying to hit people at home watching TV, but I don't watch a whole lot of TV, so I don't know for sure what everybody's seeing, but that's what I'm seeing. I'm a big baseball fan, so the World Series has got my attention. So as all data people should be, by the way, all data people should be baseball people, because it's the best data. I started my data career collecting baseball cards and stats back then. But anyway, you hear a lot about hybrid cloud, but at the end of the day, the data, I think, will live in the cloud. And I think you're starting to see very traditional companies moving to the cloud. And I think as everybody gets to the cloud, there's going to be some things that happen, I think, around interactivity of different clouds. I think multi-cloud's here to stay, despite the failures of Anthos. Anthos was probably the wrong approach to multi-cloud, but I don't know if you guys have seen the recent. There was I think it was something on Twitter was talking about how Anthos was like the worst product ever at Google or something, which is saying something. But like multi-cloud is here to stay, and really I think each cloud has its own value. And like I said earlier, I think you're going to see more and more people going to a centralized data architecture that leverages the best of breed technologies in unique ways, and that the vendors are kind of pivoting. And you've seen it with Snowflake, right? They released the media cloud, the financial cloud. Like they're trying to make it easy for these, I don't want to call them laggards yet. They're not quite laggards, but the late adopters to really kind of make it easy for them to come into the cloud. And so I think, that's kind of where the attention is bringing all of those companies to the cloud. AWS has spent, a lot of money and made a lot more money bringing companies to the cloud. And I think that's going to continue. And then you're just going to start seeing some really exciting cloud solutions, I think, that build on top of that. And we're already starting to see kind of some waves of just what people can do now that everything's in the cloud.
Let's got a question here from Joe Brooks. What's up? He asks, how do you see Firebolt positioning for sub-second workloads versus augmenting your EDW with an in-memory database?
It's a great question. I think we leverage memory pretty heavily in our service, but I think at the end of the day, cloud makes in-memory hard. You look at, I was talking to somebody yesterday in the industry, or not yesterday, but a couple of days ago, about Exasol and how like no one has been able to reproduce Exasol performance in the cloud. In-memory is awesome. In fact, one of my fellow SEs at Snowflake back in the early days was like, I was at Exasol, and if it weren't for cloud, I'd still be at Exasol. Like I saw the cloud coming. And it's funny because if you look at Firebolt, we allow you to choose different EC2 nodes. And the largest EC2 node that we allow you to choose from a memory perspective is 700 gigabytes, 768 gigabytes. So like no one's really created, and obviously you can like scale that out, right, with multiple nodes and like you get across that. But I have yet to see, and I know Single Store is doing some exciting stuff, but I've yet to see kind of an in-memory database that leverages the cloud in the way that I feel like the cloud should be leveraged. And so I think we're trying to approach the performance of in-memory by leveraging SSD and, a decent amount of memory itself. And the way that, our F3 file format kind of leverages that memory in a unique way. So I think we kind of fall into the best of both worlds. But, I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of competition, right? I mean, my former employee, Kyligence, is the same idea of sitting on top of a Snowflake or a data lake and trying to be the query layer. I think where we make the case is that we're a more complete solution, and we don't necessarily, while you can pull data and sync data between, we kind of stand alone more than some of the, we support more use cases than a pure in-memory would.
Interesting. That's a really good question, Joe.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, Joe. If you.
Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, I talked to a lot of different vendors, Single Store included, and Druid and Imply and so forth. I think the in-memory is one thing. I think that's interesting. I think it solves certain problems. Yeah, the thing where I'm trying to reconcile it right now is these subsequent query loads with like streaming ingestion, especially. Like
Yeah,
that's where I'm very fascinated. I think Druid's doing some really cool stuff there. Do you guys work with streams, by the way?
we do. It's still in its early phases, but we've got a Kafka adapter that'll be out very soon. And
Like,
but at the end of the day, we are a data warehouse, so you're going to bring the data in some
yeah.
kind of a format to get it in.
Yeah, but I think in-memory is one of those things where it's, I think up to now been very cost prohibitive for a lot of companies too, right? You'd have to have like a very special workload or use case to like want to go that route. I think we're of the opinion most things we subscribe to the "it's good enough" philosophy. So
Well, that's what I say. You asked me about extreme performance, and I'm like, if a human can't tell the difference, it's probably not going to make a big difference,
right, yeah, and you
So
brought up the 5 second rule at Amazon too, right? And I'm like, well, I mean, at Amazon, I think that's I think a kind of a general rule for a front facing application, but still. I've seen plenty of companies out there. We might call them laggards or whatever, where 5 seconds that's good enough. I don't know what the difference between 5 seconds and 1 second is really going to do for anything in those cases, right? It's just
well, yeah, at Amazon, it was kind of a unique case because getting the buy button to load quickly could be key to like not your object not selling out. So like I think that drove it a little. We're probably a little over obsessive about that to make sure
well,
that
but you guys are obsessive, I think, in the right ways too, like in customer satisfaction and stuff. And I've seen lots of studies with various e-commerce companies, or even like milliseconds, right? Like each one of those adds up to dollars being lost. Abandoned carts or just people going somewhere else. So
yeah. So I think in BI really what it comes down to is I'm going to sit down and I'm going to interrogate my data, whether whether it's through like search or whether it's through drag and drop Tableau style or whether it's a dashboard where I'm drilling down. And the more questions I can ask in any given session, where I dedicate 15 minutes to answering this business question that I have, and of course, almost always when you answer that first business question, there's more business questions that pop up,
mhm.
right? And like the old days of sitting down and doing a Kimball analysis and building a dashboard to answer the 10 business questions that the user had just doesn't work anymore because it's like those 10 questions. I still remember we did a 9-month project. I won't get into the details of the project. Someday maybe I'll share them. But it was a 9-month, very waterfall project. And we showed the dashboard to the key stakeholder. And he immediately had 4 new questions. And the way we built it, each of those questions took us about 5 more months to build the answers for. So like that just doesn't work anymore. Like that model is broken because you got to go back to the data warehouse. So it's like, how many questions can I answer quickly in that 15-minute session? And if a query takes 30 seconds, I can only answer so many questions. But if a query takes a second, I have pretty much limitless questions. And slicing and dicing the data, we talk about that, but I mean, it really can have value to understand, hey, let's look at the seasonally, let's look at it week over week, let's look at it, in some, like you want to look at you don't want to miss something because you just didn't look at that one, you didn't ask that one question that mattered.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you get rid of time as the major bottleneck, time to query and so forth, I think you can answer a lot of questions. That's interesting too, because I always bring it when people ask for I want a real time dashboard. I'm like, well, that's cool. Like, what are you going to do with that if you had it? Like,
Yeah,
so,
and I mean the 2 definitions of real time. The first is I want data from a second ago. I want to know if somebody on my website, and we have this at Amazon, right? If somebody on my website had a bad experience, I want to know about it right now.
right.
And that's different. That's not Firebolt today. We may get there, right?
Mhm.
But when we're talking about real time, we're talking about ask a question, get an answer. Ask
Right.
another question, get another answer. And you don't have to follow the golden path, right? Like if I'm using query result caching to get there, then as soon as somebody asks me a question off the golden path, uh, maybe 30 seconds till I get that answer. So, you've got to have a flexible enough architecture that you can ask any reasonable question and get an answer quickly.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I know we both see workloads where some queries, I mean, geez, those things take even a half hour to run. So you're talking 30 minutes.
I was shocked when I got to Amazon. We had jobs that ran overnight, and it was to produce one number,
That's
right?
crazy.
And that's where it comes down to, like I was saying, with that dashboard, why it took us 4 months to get the answers to those additional 4 questions was because we had to go through so many hoops to answer the questions we had. And that's why back then, why Kimball was so important was because you needed to know the business questions ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
Because it took so long to go through the ETL, the data modeling, all that, and then build whatever BI layer on top of it, right? Like there were all these pieces that you had to build to make it work. And now you just the architecture is so much better that you can get there much quicker.
Do you think that Kimball is maybe getting a bit long in the tooth, or do you still think it's relevant in today's world?
I think data modeling is important.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the technology may have moved past, like a lot of data modeling in the past was to work around limitations of the system. I mean, that's why
Right.
you did ETL, right? ETL came about because like the database was small and very limited in resources. And so you go spin up a box that could run Informatica or whatever, data services or whatever. And it would do all the transformation work, heavy lifting. And then, once you got Spark jobs running, you could do these huge transfer, MapReduce even back in the day, right? Hadoop, you could do massive transformations. And now the data warehouses are different. And so I think to some degree, and I think both Inman and Kimball have been vocal at times. I know they're kind of getting to the end of their careers and less active than they had been, but like they have adopted some of their techniques. But I do think there's a lot of flexibility that's available in the new solutions that kind of minimize some of the techniques that you used. Like slowly changing dimensions were something where you had to be so careful back in the day. But now it's like, if I dump all the data in a table, I can figure out at query time what the current state at any given point in time was. Like there's some new techniques that are possible that you just couldn't do back in the day.
Right. Yeah, I'm interested to see the evolution of this too. Kind of as it goes along. Interesting. I got a jet. Actually, I have a contractor like banging on my door right now that I have to go tend to. But it's been a fun chat. For people who want to learn more about Firebolt, how would they do that?
Just come to our website. We have a chat bot to welcome you once you get there, but
Hey.
you can get to our sales team pretty quickly. And feel free to hit me up. I'm at Todd Beauchene on Twitter. I can definitely connect you. Obviously on LinkedIn, you can reach out, but happy to take anybody through the process. But it's exciting times.
Cool. Yeah, I'll drop your contact info in the show notes as well. So, Todd, it's always fascinating talking with you. I hope we can do it again soon. So,
yeah, I'd love to join you again, and I hope everybody has.
And actually, you're presenting at the Utah Data Engineering Meetup next month. So,
yes, I'm very excited for that opportunity. So,
yeah, stay tuned for that. This will be a lot of fun. Awesome. Well, thanks to Firebolt. Thanks for Todd for showing up at the Joe and Friends show. If you haven't done so, please subscribe to our YouTube at Ternary Data. Smash the like buttons, and then subscribe to our newsletter at ternarydata.com. Got exclusive content every week. So thanks, and we'll talk to everybody soon. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.